So this is the OpenMRS Developer Forum for September the 3rd of 2015, and we have folks from Google and MSF here to present to us about Project Buendia. Dan, do you want to share your screen?
So Ping's going to try and share his screen.
Okay.
Oh, maybe I can do it.
I'll stop sharing mine.
So maybe you can't.
What is the button? Is it this one? No,
It's now drive.
it is. Oh, I just shared it with you personally. So, okay, I can share a screen. Okay, it's fine. You're all seeing my screen?
It's working.
Great. Oh, this is okay.
Well, it's, I guess I should say it's working on working. It's looks like it's trying to share. I don't see a screen quite yet.
Oh, okay.
I can see it's fine.
Yep.
Okay. So
Great. All right. Should I begin?
sure.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, and again, sorry to have screwed up a bit about the starting time, but I'm glad that you folks are here and you're making time to talk about this with us. It's really appreciated. So I just wanted to take a little bit of this time to tell you what we're up to and what we've been doing since we transitioned from the Ebola project to the new phase of this project. I just go over some of our experiences with OpenMRS, some of our, in particular, this is going to emphasize a little bit the areas where we've had some pain and some things that we're looking at in the hope that folks might either have some ideas for us or it might guide some of your thinking about where we're going next. My understanding from Darius was that in this meeting or in this set of meetings, there's some discussion about future development plans. So we're hoping that this might be a fruitful time to talk about things that that we might want to, or that might be improved or changed in different ways. Also, feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point. So for those of you who possibly didn't make the last time that Nick presented about this, just quickly, we formed a team of folks from MSF and from outside volunteers and from Google during the Ebola response to develop a medical record solution for MSF's Ebola centers. And it was a very unusual set of constraints. We needed the tablets to be immersible and sterilizable. We needed to, there's infection control procedures between the high-risk zone and the low-risk zone. So the idea is we had a server running outside the high-risk zone and the low-risk zone, a local Wi-Fi network, and all the tablets communicating with that server and synchronizing with it over regular Wi-Fi, just a local Wi-Fi network with no internet. Because the power source is also occasional, we had power running over generators, so power beyond, maybe a few hours a night. Everything ran on battery, since we have a low-power server, 5 volts Edison platform that runs a battery and is charged periodically. We got these deployed in Sierra Leone at one of the Ebola management centers there. It was a small deployment, but it was actually used. Let's see, I guess the rest of this is just about how we accommodate some of those constraints. So as I mentioned, the server is battery powered, it runs the network. It runs OpenMRS, and we had a module that we developed, an extension module for OpenMRS that provides a REST API to the data that we cared about. And for the most part, we followed the OpenMRS data model, although there are a couple of ways in which we diverged, which I'll talk about. And because we need the system to be robust, we needed to handle a situation in which, for example, the server might be lost or destroyed. So we have a backup process running that saves a copy of the data to a USB stick. And the idea is that you can just take that USB stick and plug it into another server, and it imports all the data and comes back up with the state that it was previously in. Similarly, all the software updates that we needed to do also need to take place over USB. So the model is someone at the field office, for example, headquarters, who might have access to email. We would email them an update package consisting of some Debian packages. This is server just running Linux, so we packaged everything in Debian packages. And plugging that USB stick into the server causes it to automatically install whatever packages are on the stick. On the client side, that was where a lot of our sort of really interesting situational constraints came into play. So it's Android tablets. We needed the tablets to be really simple and really highly visible for folks who are working under stress, working with goggles and PPE on. Knew that UI with big letters and big colors, so it was easy for people to see, easy to operate with 3 layers of gloves on. So we really emphasized designing around the user experience we needed, and then trying to conform everything else to make that fit. Again, because of intermittent connectivity, we tried to synchronize all the data down to the tablet, so that if you needed to access the data, even if for some reason you lost connectivity, the server was temporarily unavailable, you would be able to search and view and browse the patient data on the tablet. We do still require that you be online with the server if you're making edits. So if you're creating a new patient or you're adding observations about a patient, those are sent immediately to the server when you submit them, and you get confirmation that they have been saved there. So we're now transitioning to a new phase of the project. We did this deployment for the Ebola Center in Sierra Leone that I mentioned, but it was quite late in the process. We deployed there late February, early March, which is pretty short for a development cycle that started in November, but by then the outbreak had been starting to slow down. And so we are looking for a place where we can take advantage of all of this development effort and design effort that we put into the system to see if it could still be useful. And so we're looking for an application that can scale. And even though Ebola was a really big problem, and it could have been much, much worse, it's also the sort of thing that doesn't happen all the time. And upon consulting with our colleagues at MSF, we found that there are folks who are really, really excited about applying it for nutrition. So it's one of the most, possibly the most massive ongoing programs that MSF has. It afflicts a huge number of kids, of course, and they already have a very efficient, scaled up, ongoing running process for running nutrition programs at many of their missions. As it turns out, a large fraction of the missions involve some form of displaced people, whether it's a conflict or a disaster, a natural disaster. There's almost always a displaced population, for instance, in a refugee camp, and almost always there's a need for nutrition, for handling cases of malnutrition with therapeutic feeding. So it's very broadly, this program is run very broadly in lots of places around the world. It's run every year. It's been run for a long time. There's a pretty standardized protocol. There's a guide. I've actually got the pretty thick. And it is limited to some extent. by the staffing availability of people who run these programs. And if we're able to make it more efficient, if we're able to make it faster and easier to collect data, make these decisions. The number of people who can serve as staff in these programs, and thereby expand the size of these programs and expand their reach more kids. Just one side note I want to mention is that there are headline cross-cutting factor that greatly increases mortality of many of these diseases. So in some sense, it's some large fraction of malaria, TB, and HIV deaths are deaths that have been made more probable or exacerbated by nutritional issues. So you'll see a lot of that comorbidity in these programs. So how are we doing this? We're, again, trying to keep our UI really simple. We've got a straightforward model with patient admission, a list of patients that you can browse and filter, and then a patient chart that you can update by adding observations. And we're trying to make that configurable, how you add those observations. Some of the things we're looking at coming up that we haven't tackled yet are ways of helping reduce errors. So either guiding clinicians as they go through the data entry process, guiding them as to what things they should be looking out for, what checklist items they should be following. If, for instance, they're moving a patient from one phase to another phase, or into the ICU or out of the ICU, that's an opportunity to present some checklists and prevent some errors. And also detecting and highlighting interesting conditions. A combination of particular criteria that suggests maybe it's time to order a malaria test or an HIV test, or the patient should be checked for a particular disease, or checked for moving to a different phase of the program. And then a big part of the motivation behind this, especially the interest on MSF's side, is that even though we're targeting nutrition, we're kind of using it as an opportunity to, basically by taking this from one context to two contexts, making it possible to expand to an arbitrary number of contexts. That we want to make it easy for people who are not engineers or not programmers to reconfigure the forms for data entry that people use, and also to reconfigure the UI that people see, to highlight the particular pieces of information that are really important to the type of program they're running. So the approach we're taking to configuration is that we're asking people to edit spreadsheets. It's something they're already quite familiar with. If you know about ODK and XLS forms, people are very used to editing spreadsheets that describe what kinds of data they want to collect. And so we're prototyping and experimenting with a spreadsheet format that's very much along similar lines. So what you're looking at here is an example of a spreadsheet that defines a form for collecting information about patients. And we're finding that this method of editing things in a spreadsheet has quite a few advantages as compared to, for instance, I know that you can edit forms in the OpenMRS UI by clicking around in the form editor. But having all this information in a spreadsheet means we don't need to build an editor for it. Everybody has Excel in their machines already. The configuration state of the server, all of the forms that are used, and all of the UI configurations that are used can be saved in a single file. So now you have a configuration file. You can, headquarters can email you such a file. You can deploy it just by uploading this spreadsheet to our module. Or you can, save previous versions of it, keep copies of the files around for later use, and so on. So we find that having this as a single artifact that you can share and you can potentially edit using tools that people are familiar with is appealing to them. So the way this is working in our module currently is there's a page in our module you can go to where you can upload a number of these files, these profiles with we're calling them, and then select a particular profile, and it will apply that profile to the current database by making a whole bunch of changes. For instance, uploading this spreadsheet will create a form, add some fields to that form, add the necessary concepts that are missing, change or edit or add the names of the concepts to match the labels that people actually want to appear in the form, adjust the normal and absolute ranges for these concepts. Realize this is a bit of a tricky area because I know that there are canonical definitions of these concepts, and that the concepts have standard labels and they have standard normal and absolute ranges. But for now, this is a way that we find seems to work fairly well with the way the system's currently designed, and gives each mission the kind of flexibility that they need. They need to be able to change the way that these labels appear on the fly. They need to be able to change the set of options that are available for concept without having to, for instance, go to the concept dictionary maintainers, submit a change, wait some amount of time for that change to be approved, get the concept ID, and migrate all the data. So, we picked OpenMRS because it's an open system that it seems to have a very strong history and a strong community behind it. We're still learning about it, so we don't know all there is to know about how it is built, how it works, how best to deploy it, but we're kind of figuring it out as we go along. And so, of course, your advice and help is very much appreciated. And we know that it's been deployed lots and lots of times out there. And so there's already an established base of not only knowledge, but interest and appeal in this project. So here's some of what we're doing with it. There's a couple of things that we're having that have been impediments to us that I just wanted to point out in case they are things you're thinking about or things that improvements might be on the way for. The development cycle that we have with OpenMRS is quite slow because starting up the system involves starting up Tomcat and Hibernate. It takes a long time for the system to start. Every time we make a change, we ought to, for instance, make a change to the configuration or change the UI or change our module and restart. It can take 3 or 5 minutes to start, and that's a long time if you want to see a change that you've just made. Even fairly small database operations like saving a concept can take up to a second, which is a very long time for one operation. So this sort of thing, I think, doesn't matter much when you have deployed an enterprise system for a large deployment, for example, and you've already done the development. But in this particular context, we're doing a lot of rapid iteration. We're working directly with MSF. They're coming back to us over and over again with feedback and changes they want to make, design changes that we're trying to make, which we both learn as we're working in the office with MSF medical staff and logistics staff, but also in the field as we're in the field we want to change things. So there's a bit of friction there, I think, with being able to iterate quickly, and certainly open to hearing suggestions on how we can iterate more quickly. There's also some friction that makes it harder to get started up developing and to develop quickly. There's a lot of complexity in the system. I'm just personally finding that trying to debug what is happening when something, when an API call takes place in OpenMRS, it's quite tricky. There are many, many layers of abstraction to get through. The Spring framework, the aspect-oriented programming that's involved, the use of Hibernate, all of that obfuscates and obscures what's actually happening under the covers. So to find out, what row in the database is actually touched when you make a change can be very difficult. And if you want to extend that, if you want to, add an SQL query, a custom SQL query or a custom table, that seems to be quite difficult. Some of the things that we're doing to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So we are using OpenMRS orders to represent medication orders. in our system. But it's also important for the applications we're doing for clinicians to be able to record when medications are administered. It's actually medications in terms of drugs administered, but also when tests are carried out or when feeding is performed. So in nutrition, there's a regular feeding schedule that has to take place, and they have a particular way of recording that on paper, and we're trying to match the experience that they're familiar with. And so to fit that without investing in the effort I was just talking about in creating new tables and a new service and a new API, which seemed quite daunting. We decided to reuse observations as a way of recording when orders are executed. So, we need something timestamped that consisted of an encounter with the patient carrying out an order, and just defining a concept to mean this order was carried out or this medication was administered as an observation that took place at a point in time is a way that we're working around that. Also interested in your feedback about that.
Do you like to stick your feedback on things in line, or are you going to go through everything?
Feel free to jump in if you've got thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say that using observations to record that an order was executed is the correct way. Or, I mean, at least it's correct to sort of use an observation to record sort of the outcome of that order.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, it's perfectly fine to say we want to observe that someone placed this order. In general, if you want to manage orders and be able to have a list of what's active, what meds is someone on, then the order service is trying to meet that need.
So I think what he was saying is that they use an order to record the order and an observation to record that the order was carried out.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that's fine.
That's what we're doing, yeah. And to do that, we just invented a concept, one concept for the whole system that just means order execute. And the particular order that was executed, observation.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly valid approach. When it comes to fulfillment of an order, there's a lot of different, possibilities, because in a simple system where people are making requests through orders and then fulfillment, you just need to be able to record that it was fulfilled. That's one case. When you're ordering a lab order and it's going to an external lab system, there's other workflows and other ways that you might get feedback. If you're ordering a radiology test in a hospital, how that gets fulfilled or the notification of fulfillment might be completely different. So there's not really a kind of a one simple solution for order fulfillment.
Got it. I see. Okay, that's kind of encouraging to hear that some of what we've done is in approximately the right direction. Mm-hmm. I imagine it will get more complicated. We're realizing, for example, that the feeding chart doesn't just indicate whether the patient was fed. They also use it to indicate, for instance, whether the patient was fed orally or nasogastrically, or whether the patient was fed some amount of the nutritional food, and did they eat half of it, or did they consume all of it? Did they reject it?
What you probably will end up doing is, rather than just recording that the order was executed, you sort of would be recording the outcome of it, and that would be an OBS group that would have some OBS in it, and the OBS group would point back to the order it is fulfilling. Mm-hmm. And to know whether an order has been executed, you basically look and see, is there an OBS that points back to that order ID.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Sorry, since I've sort of run ahead, did you folks want to make any comments, or do you have any thoughts about some of the other things I said prior to leading up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I've had comments all throughout, but I thought we'd kind of let you finish the presentation before we.
Maybe you want, since we're With 13 minutes left, maybe
Yeah.
you want to go through the rest of the presentation and then highlight the things that you think are most pressing.
Sure. I think, so because I got the time wrong, I also didn't quite get everything into slides. I think we're pretty much close to what I've got here. So I've got this slide and then the next one, and that's pretty much it.
Okay.
So I guess I'll just quickly run through this, and we can spend the last 10 minutes or something just discussing where we are and what I might have missed, or what things might happen in the future. So that's how we're doing order execution. That's one of the primary ways in which we're extending the data model right now. For the form configuration I was talking about, where you take this spreadsheet we've uploaded and we're applying that to the database, that form is each form is becoming an OpenMRS form with form fields in it, and fields that link that form to concepts, which I believe is the way that it's intended to be used. Some aspects of the way that form fields, some columns in the form field table I don't fully understand, but so far we're just using it to describe what order the fields appear in the form and how they're grouped into sections, and the concepts they're associated with. So that is enough for us to generate the form. The way we're doing that, though, is with a script that just reads the spreadsheet and then applies a whole bunch of changes directly to the MySQL database. And we're doing that for two reasons. One is we've been changing that process. Again, we've been rapidly iterating on the format of the spreadsheet to make it palatable to people who are editing it. And converting that into API calls would be a lot of complex work. It's maybe not as difficult for somebody who understands the API inside and out, but I found it much easier to just look at the MySQL database and see what it represented, and then just make the changes directly using SQL queries. And the other reason is that it just seems to be extremely slow. If it takes a second to save a concept, it would take many minutes to do the upload. But applying the changes with MySQL, I hit the button, it's done in less than a second. So, if you're changing your spreadsheet and you want to see the results, and you want to change it and see the results, and get a feedback loop on whether you're making the form look the way you want it to look, it's extremely helpful to have a fast iteration loop for that. For the chart, so we have a main screen. I guess I should have taken a screenshot. Maybe I can share one with you. A tablet screen that has the top with some basic patient information, their name, which room or location in the facility they're in, and some immediate information about their current status. So I just lost the teleconferencing screen. We are. And then underneath that, we've got a grid that shows the history of the patient. Again, it's designed to match the paper forms that they currently use. There's a column for each day or a column for each week. And then the rows are all observations, like the weight of the patient, their malaria test status, their pulse, respiration, etc. And the layout of that chart, in terms of the order that things go in which rows and how those rows are grouped, and then how each cell is presented. Is it a number? Is it formatted with one decimal point or not? Is it a string? Is it represented with an icon? Those things are all configured also in a similar fashion. There's a spreadsheet table that lists the concepts in the order you want them to be shown, and some additional properties that indicate how you want to customize their appearance. We also used OpenMRS forms for that. They're not actually forms, but they have a similar data structure, and we're able to retrieve them through the same API. So we're saving them as OpenMRS forms, and we're using some of the concept properties, such as the ranges for what's considered normal or abnormal, to influence that display, like to color the numbers red, for example, when they're out of range. Okay, and then the last thing I just had was there's a lot of logic in OpenMRS that both seems surprisingly rigid and also rigid in ways that don't help. I mean, there are many kinds of validation, some of which I definitely see the rationale for. But some of those validation constraints also enforce things that get in our way. So for example, there are a whole bunch of constraints that make assumptions on time. I've listed just a few of them there. That only work if there's only one computer system in the whole universe and there's exactly one clock. So, encounters are rejected if they're a millisecond in the past, which can totally happen with a client-server system. So we needed to relax or work around some of these constraints to make this work. There's some logic. So there's some logic in orders, for example, that modifies the data as you're saving it by changing the expiry date to the end of the day in the server's time zone. So that's problematic for us because then we can't rely on the API to faithfully save the data. We just told it what we wanted to save, and saving a different value than what we told it to. But also because the change it's making is dependent on the server's local time zone, which which varies from server to server. So we can't even guarantee that there's a consistent transformation of the data on the way in. Encounters, as they're currently configured, seem to only store their date, not their time, or actually they reset the time to be midnight UTC. So we had to do some custom working around with a special XSLT document to change the data type of the encounter timestamp from a date to a date time. And then this last one, there's a validation constraint that you can't have two concepts with the same name. And again, I kind of get why that seems like it might be a good idea to prevent confusion. If you're looking up a concept by name, you want there to be only one such concept. But it has some pretty difficult consequences for data maintenance. Like if you want to, the fact that you have this constraint means you can't import concepts anymore. Like if you have a bulk import and you want to import it, you can't reliably import that data without either modifying that data or modifying data that's already in the system. So that makes imports irreversible, which is difficult for a system that we want to be able to reconfigure like this. So there have been a bunch of workarounds that we needed to do to get around things like this. I can. Sorry if that's confusing. I can elaborate more if that's.
No, it makes sense because you're looking at it from the standpoint of the people trying to get data in, and a lot of the systems that have been built up are also driven by people trying to do research or do calculations around the data that and reporting on the data that have been entered, and that's what's kind of tried to drive the process of when you're creating forms and concepts to deal with the fact that the uniqueness or that these two things, how many children do you have, asking it on 3 different forms in 3 different ways, dealing with that inconsistency or duplication up front rather than waiting to deal with it later. And I think that's just been a choice in the community. The way we've evolved is folks have favored trying to deal with that up front. For rapid iteration, it gets in your way. I mean, it forces you to deal with it up front or work around it and push that problem to later.
Well, there's 2 aspects to it. Yes, it does force you to deal with it up front, but the way in which that's implemented means that it takes the choice away from you as to when you want to deal with it, right? If you're implementing another UI, you could in fact enforce it for UI. But because the validation which you would expect to happen at the UI level is baked into the lowest levels of the system, you don't have a choice of taking on that responsibility, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you mean like you're adding a concept, and ideally you would know as you're choosing that concept that, oh, there's already one with that name.
Right.
If someone's making a spreadsheet independently of the system, they're not going to get that feedback.
Yes.
but one workaround is that the uniqueness is in the fully specified name of the concept. The idea is that when you describe what you're putting into the database, that's supposed to be unique. And so one potential workaround for that would be to say, this is, Ping's form, how many children do you have, as a fully specified concept, and then have a synonym or a preferred name that is just how many children do you have. In which case, for someone coming along later trying to sort out, well, why do we have 3 concepts for how many children do you have, and maybe they're identical, maybe they're not. That becomes a big mess in terms of trying to interpret the data. You could work around that by saying this is, giving a fully specified name that adds the uniqueness, and then use preferred name to be the kind of name you want to use within the system.
I see what you mean. Okay, got it. If I understand correctly, so we're realizing there's another way to work around this, which I only just recently realized. Because form fields also have names. It seems like we could give the form field an arbitrary name that doesn't have to match the name of the concept.
Yeah.
And use the present.
Yeah, I would.
But as far
Darius entered. He put something into the notes that basically the form field tables were designed around 2005 and haven't been really touched in 10 years. So it's not surprising that they're disappointing you. So we would be open to redoing. A lot of the initial work on form, and the form design was done in the very beginning of making the OpenMRS system and driving to try to make schemas that could be fed into InfoPath, and those that's history. So we'd be open to saying, well, not just how do we find a workaround, but how can we actually change this so that it works better for everybody. It's just a matter of, where a lot of folks, like in the HTML form entry and some of the other folks making forms are using the form table to record that there's a form, and using form resources to store information about that view or maybe model information, and form field isn't being widely used. So maybe you end up following that same pattern, or if we can make it useful to you, we make some adjustments to how form field is implemented.
Okay, so, that is interesting. Yeah. It looks like because fields have names, we can assign form field names to concepts. The questions can have arbitrary presentation text.
Right,
but
and that's the sort of...
The answers are not represented in the form, so we only have the concept names for the answers, as far as I can tell.
Interesting point. I think, well, I don't know. I think it's possible the way it's been used, you are allowed to have answers in the fields, but I don't know, actually. Like one of the type. Anyway, I wrote a module that bypassed that completely because it was sort of not enough at the time. So, but yes, what you're quote unquote supposed to do is use fields. Fields are supposed to represent more or less the UI impact of a concept.
Yeah.
However, they don't have the internationalization, which you probably isn't needed for one specific project.
I guess that's true, yeah. This thing, this spreadsheet containing all of these tabs containing configuration information, which we're currently calling a profile. We imagine that there will be one profile per project deployment. We deploy to the field with the profile installed, or we email them the profile, and then their server magically turns into a nutrition mission server with nutrition mission forms and etc. We may end up conflating localization with that, or may not. It seems likely that any given mission will probably only be in one language, and so we'll just have the profile define everything in that language. But that way, that's still TBD.
Well, being mindful of we've used up the hour, I think we don't want to end the conversation here. I I think if there are a couple things that are highest priority for you in terms of trying to get an answer, maybe we could quickly address those. Otherwise, maybe we do a little bit of feedback asynchronously after the call, or we try to bring you back and have another round.
Okay, I'm happy to, yeah, we can certainly talk about this and discuss feedback asynchronously afterward. Maybe just one thing I want to make a little bit of space for now is if you guys have questions for us about what we're doing, if you're interested in the roadmap that I hinted at here, if there are parts of it that are interesting to you or you want to know more about, maybe there's an opportunity for you to ask.
I mean, I guess it would be interesting to know when you're envisioning the first deployment or first go live. Right.
We're in piloting stages now. We haven't ever taken this to the field yet. So the first thing we're going to do is take it out, find a field site that's willing to accommodate us iterating with them. And that is probably, I would say, 3-ish weeks off, 3 to 4 weeks off. And then after that, we would cycle back with something that was more of an actual pilot to be used, sort of more for real as opposed to just with a few test patients. So then the second or third deployment, which would be maybe some number of months later, would be at scale.
So just as commentary, that's quite a fast timeline for the sort of this community, as it's made up of volunteer, to the extent that it's made up from volunteers, tends to be more rambling than that. So
yeah.
We will try to be, we're pretty interested in what you guys are doing, and we'll try to, especially as we're working through things you're running into as difficulties in the system, we'll try to figure out how to empower you to fix those most quickly.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't want to create the expectation that you folks are going to re-engineer major parts of the system in weeks. But it is great to be in touch with you and to be able to ask and answer questions and just keep each other up to date on what's going on.
Yeah, OpenMRS, it's not like there's some OpenMRS company and it created a medical record system and then there's a group of people trying to use it. It really was built out of people that are doing exactly what you guys are doing, trying to solve local problems and realizing, if we share some stuff, maybe we'll get along, that we'll all benefit. And it's been good and bad. There's been times where that and major times where that has benefited the people trying to get the work done, as well as had the side effect of providing a platform that other people can get started more quickly. It does have the downside of, as Darius says, that there's times where something doesn't get done unless someone makes it a priority and actually puts the effort into it. And there's not necessarily some OpenMRS company that is that's building the system for us. And so this is absolute gold for us, for you guys to come and give us this kind of feedback and just talk about what's good, what's bad, what are the tough spots, because it does help us as a community kind of prioritize and say, how can we make this better for everybody? And there's several things that you've pointed out that I think are very real issues that if we can, in our roadmap, try to address those, will not only help you guys but help everybody. So really appreciate you guys. There are a lot of, we know there's a lot of effort where people will go off and they'll build cool things and they'll have some frustrations, they'll have some benefits, as you've run into, but we never hear from them. And so to have groups like yours coming saying, hey, we're trying to use this, let's have a conversation and and see if we can't make this thing better is absolutely gold for us. So we really appreciate your taking the time and coming and talking with us.
Thank you. That's really gracious. I really appreciate having your time and attention, and just your openness to hearing about this. I realize I have maybe what sounds like a lot of criticism, and expresses
we've heard before.
Actual frustration we've experienced, but I don't want to sound like we don't value the work that you've done.
One thing actually, Ping, that I think you didn't mention today, but you've mentioned to me before, is around web services, and particularly that the OpenMRS web services don't let you make transactional calls to multiple, like to do a few things in one transaction.
Yeah, that's certainly, yes.
You should keep pushing us on that, because it would be great. We should really fix that.
That is actually something that we're in our design calls are trying to address. But that was one question I had, as to what extent you're using the REST services. You talk, in some of the functionality of needing to bypass the API and go straight under to SQL. But are there aspects of the system where is the REST API being helpful to you?
We're not using these existing REST API. We've implemented our own REST API. I mean, we're using the base classes and interfaces to make it easier for us to implement our REST API. But to the extent that there already is another API, we're not using that. We're using an API exposed by our module. Okay.
So I mean, that would be, I think, another very helpful thing for us to look and see where, what decisions and what things are you doing in the API you've created relative to what is in the OpenMRS REST API, and is there enough overlap that with some evolution of the rest, the OpenMRS REST API, it could be useful to.
Right. Yeah. Our stuff. So we previously, when we were developing, inside Google and with MSF for the Ebola stuff, all of our repositories, or many of our repositories, were private. And since we made the transition, all the work that we're doing is in public repositories now on GitHub. So it's all visible, works, and everything as we hack on it.
Can you paste a link to that in the notes for today?
Oh yeah, projectbuendia.org takes you to everything, but also the GitHub repository is just called Project Buendia.
Okay.
The GitHub organization is Project Buendia, and it contains all the repositories.
Buendia.org.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and I'm sorry, time-wise, we got a little confused and got off to a late start. These things.
That's totally my bad.
Well, when we heard when we had the conversation in May and heard feedback, it was incredibly helpful to kind of hear where you guys were struggling. We have a lot of legacy that folks are working with, but we're we're trying to evolve that to and a lot more people. We're seeing a lot more development where folks are working, being able to do the rapid iteration in Angular or web client side against a REST API, and so a lot of and the REST exposing a REST API has allowed us to make some fixes to the API underneath that we sometimes it's not as easy to change a Java API to say that everybody is sharing to behave a certain way, but we can expose the REST API above that and correct some things. And so it's given us a little more flexibility to evolve. And so I think that model of where people can get in and create modules and do things under the hood when they need to, but more and more I'm seeing folks hitting a REST endpoint and iterating around that. That's where I think we could find some we can maybe move a little quicker or address things a little easier. anyway, but this stuff is gold for us. So we will, as a community, we will, you know, we can use this kind of feedback to help prioritize and reinforce the things that are working well and work on the things that are really the biggest bummers for development. So don't stop complaining.
Okay, thank you.
You can blow out a can.
One thing, if you want to add to the notes, I'm sorry I don't have the notes open, but I want to mention this because it's important.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to do the synchronization model, right? In which we've got some data on the server and we're synchronizing the tablets and to do as much viewing and editing on the tablets as we can offline if possible. And so we're heavily focused when we do that synchronization on how to do incremental transfers, how to figure out, you know, what has changed since the tablet last synchronized and how to get just that instead of downloading the entire database. And so the encounter model works pretty great for that, for observations. But for other things, we have to either struggle or invent, you know, for keeping track, for example, you know, which patients have been added or edited since the last time the tablet synced.
Yeah.
Or even just to query encounters, you know, which encounters were changed or edited since last time. I think there's only a query on encounter date time, but there's no way to query on encounter, you know, modified time or created time.
All right. Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for the feedback. The getting you on developer forums and a chance to present is a great way to get feedback. Hopefully, have you guys used OpenMRS Talk at all to get questions answered or to reach out to the community?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah,
just a couple times so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that we don't limit our conversation to you know, every once in a while we're here and we're you know, we would more than happy to engage you guys kind of in between when things come up to see you run into something, for example, of like the concept thing or that, you know, where you're like, oh man, this is a pain. Feel free to throw that out. We may not have a quick answer, but it's more than likely we could come up with an informed workaround for you.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Next week we have we're starting planning or we'll be reviewing kind of where we are with the 2.4 release of the reference application, and we want to start brainstorming on how we can develop metrics to follow on community priority tickets, so that as a community we can know where we're going or where we're spending our time and resources, and trying to inform that. So I think Darius has some insights into that. He and I have been discussing it. So we'll chat about that as well as kind of our upcoming release at the end of this month of the web application. Thanks everybody for joining. Any last comments before we end the call?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for presenting. I know everybody appreciates it, and it's only through people taking the time to do this kind of stuff that we can get better. We don't really learn as much from our successes than we do from our failures, and we've definitely reached the point you can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire, as Peter Gabriel says. So, all right. So thanks. We will see folks that can join us next week for the call. We'll see you next week, and between now and then, we will see you in cyberspace.
Take care. Thank you.